Lee Anderson.
Thanks, Chair. Paul, you said earlier that I think it was 90% of people get a refund or their money back if they've been a victim of fraud. And that may seem the right and decent thing to do, but where does that money come from?
It's funded by TSB from our revenue and ultimately comes off our profits.
So it comes from the customer?
It comes from TSB's profits.
It comes from the customer? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay, so I think that's a little bit unfair. But anyway, I'll move on to a case that I had in my constituency. I had an old lady, she was maybe 90. She kept receiving scam phone calls to say that there was some fraud going off in her local branch and that she had to remove all her money from her account and transfer it to this other account. And she was also told by the scammer, who kept ringing week after week, also told by the scammer that everybody who worked in that branch was corrupt. So she couldn't trust anybody in the branch to tell her, the manager, anybody. So she had to go down to the bank with this dodgy sort code and bank account number and ask to transfer, I think it was £10,000 into this bank account, wherever it was. And the teller, the cashier, said it was a scam. And the bank manager had her in and said it was a scam. But she'd got it in her head that these were all part of this plot and they were committing fraud. And eventually she transferred the money and there was nothing the bank manager could do. Now, since then she's got half the money back, but again that is customers' money that she's got back. But for me, it struck me that there would have been an easier way to stop this happening. If vulnerable people, older people, because it's normally the vulnerable and the elderly that get scammed, because I've seen it in my own surgery, yeah, if they'd had like a counter signature on their account, or a family member, a son, a daughter, somebody trusted, or even the bank manager, to authorise that transfer, then that would have stopped that. Do you agree?
Well, I've seen lots of similar cases myself, and I agree they're really distressing. It's something we've been working hard on with our branch teams, and also we partner with the police on something called banking protocol, which is incredibly effective at stopping that type of scam, because the police can provide effectively an emergency response to visit the branch, and we do find that in those cases the police turning up can be what jolts the victim out of the state they've been put in by the criminal. I think the point you make around customers being able to have an extra person added to their account is a really important one. I think it's something that would not be unhelpful, but I think one constraint with its usefulness will be getting the word out that any service like this exists for customers. I mean, we effectively operate today by offering powers of attorney and of course joint account holders. We see some take-up of that from our customers, but not much. And I think if there was more, then it would stop more fraud from occurring.
Any other? Chris?
So we have been working on what we would call almost a second-party notification protocol, which we have used to good effect. Mainly that's to do with other forms of vulnerability, not directly to do with fraud. And in a similar way, obviously, we will offer joint accounts and banking protocol and the things that Paul mentioned. One of the interesting things I mentioned earlier is our Breaking the Spell team. And one of the key things they do for customers who are in similar circumstances, and often when we can't have a conversation with them, because that does happen, they are told everyone you speak to in the bank is involved in this fraud. Sometimes that call may pretend to come from the police or come from other areas, is we will involve third parties where we can. Obviously that's difficult for us from a legal perspective sometimes, but involving a family member or involving someone else we can see is connected to the customer is one of the key tools we have. But as Paul says, trying to get that registered with that customer in the right fashion ahead of time is always going to be our key challenge, but it certainly is something we are working on.
No, that is actually something we have considered internally about how to provide that on a digital means. There are a lot of considerations around consent, providing access to various people to another person's funds, which to make it quite complex to operationalize. But one of back to Chris's point, by far, again, the most effective thing, or where we put most of our investment, is in breaking the spell, it is involving, we are looking at pilots to involve third parties wherever we can, with data sharing agreements, with that aspect, of course, considered.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you.